a short introduction to crisis management and what can all be related to that. Can I have the next slide, Sachin, please? We will mainly talk today about crisis management in relation to drug safety and safety of medicines and risk management in general. But you have to realize that in a company and also regulatory authorities, crises can occur in many other areas, like in the factory, like with employees, with protest groups, etc., etc. Drug safety is something that is high in the spotlight these days. Not only these days, I would say the last 10 years, but it only gets more and more. You see a lot about drug safety in the media. It is very high on the regulatory agenda, both in the United States, Canada, Australia, and in Europe. And it is generally reactive, unfortunately. Next slide. What you also should realize is that drug safety and the crises, especially problems with drugs, is not anymore something that happens in a small village or in a city or in one country. If it happens somewhere in the world, it will pass the borders very, very quickly. And especially drug crises, when patients' lives are at stake, the relations and the news will spread very quickly around the globe. Next slide. One of the things that can happen, and that can be a very short article in a journal, I call it the Lancet syndrome, where you see that somebody puts in a very short article of something he has observed, and the end conclusion of this article is then the role of this certain product in case of an adverse event cannot be ruled out, and in the worst case it says, and further investigations are warranted. And that's the case, many things will happen, and this issue will not be passed for quite a long time. Just to give you some examples of crises, and this is related to vaccine crises, but there are of course many other things, but I thought let's talk about vaccines for a while because everybody knows the other stories. One of the first problems with vaccines was already in 1926, where diphtheria was not completely inactivated, the toxin, and many people got ill. Another thing during the war in 1942, the Second World War, excuse me please, there were human serum was used as a vaccine stabilizer, and they took it from 2 military people. And one of them had hepatitis B, and it was put into the vaccine, and in total 28,000 cases of hepatitis B occurred of other military people that were vaccinated with this vaccine. So one ill person caused 28,000 other people to become ill. If you go to the 80s and 90s, what is quite well known was the excess mortality in measles vaccination for children who received a too high titer of the measles vaccines, and so on and so on. Next slide, please. In crisis management, and especially when you talk about management, we want to prevent disaster. We want to prevent big problems. So the majority of crisis management is actually related to prevention of crisis. Next slide. You all know the thalidomide story. That is the story where pharmacovigilance actually was born. Spontaneous reporting systems were put in place since there were a number of children born with malformation of the limbs mainly, and that was due to thalidomide. Thalidomide was taken as a morning sickness pill for pregnant women and was highly toxic in the first 3 months for the unborn fetus. Most of the children died, but there were also quite a number that survived, and I remember having seen these children in the street where I lived and so on. In the meantime, the survivors are around 55, 60 years old, and on the right picture you see 2 of them that celebrating their survival with a dinner and a dessert. Next slide. What the CEO asks you immediately in case of a problem, or the stakeholders, is why is there a problem? Where's the answer? Why isn't the answer already ready? And why was the answer not ready before the problem even occurred? If you're unlucky, the fifth question will be, who can we fire? This is typical of a crisis situation when people are still in loads of emotions, which leads to sometimes bizarre organizational behavior, and they're looking for the black sheep instead of trying to solve the problem. But it is true that most of the crises occur and the people have no clue where it comes from and why they didn't know in advance. Next slide. This is the crisis life cycle. You have 4 stages. There's a potential and an emerging stage. And the potential means that you have all kinds of opportunity to influence it for the better. The other problems are that at a certain moment, the media take over. And when the media take over, the crisis occurs in its full strength. And there is hardly any control anymore by the company itself, because the media make their own stories and it is not possible to turn that. At a certain moment, the crisis goes away again, but that is afterwards, and you can only hope that the company did come out in the right way. And that is what we call then the dormant stage. In the dormant stage, you cannot stop working on the crisis. You have to try to do loads of damage limitation and to get better. I think I have a crisis myself at this moment, so I have to stop for 1 minute. I'm very sorry for that. Let's continue. So if you want to take actions, first of all, there's a couple of strategic decisions that you have to take. First of all, is when do you define that the situation is in fact a real crisis? And when do you have to take action? One of the important things is that you keep calm, continue positive thinking in order to try to keep the initiative. The moment that other people outside of the company are taken over the initiative, you're more or less lost. Also in advanced planning, that is what you have to try to do. If you don't have a well-tried and tested plan, then the companies are more in a defensive mode, and this defensive mode sometimes tries to be solved by people becoming arrogant, unsympathetic, we know better, etc. And that will, most of the times, make a crisis worse. Next slide. You have to realize that anything that can go wrong will go wrong. So that's why you have to try to identify
Sorry about this pause. Looks like we seem to have some problem with the Williams here. Bear with us for a moment, please.
With animal testing for new compounds. So good risk management should be in place, and therefore the risk parameters around the scenario should already be defined. Next slide. Questions that you have to ask is that, does the company have good policies and procedures in place? And do the plans exist with dealing of every aspect of the crisis when it occurs? So you have to have a plan in advance and test these plans to see whether it works satisfactorily. You should also know which are the people or the groups or the audiences that are most likely to be affected by a potential crisis, and to be able to address these groups in advance or on time. Communication is very important, and I will put some slides on communications in a couple of moments. The communication aspect should also be tested, and it should be known in advance who is the person that can do communication. Next slide. Here is a so-called preemptive action planning, and if we start from the bottom, that is that you have to try to identify which will be an effective problem and who can be affected. If you go to the top, it is to bring into a map all kinds of potential crisis situations. And that can be a weakness in the procedure, it can be a weakness in the procedure for pharmacovigilance monitoring, but it can also be a weakness in the procedure for making a compound. And if you sometimes make compounds that are highly dangerous or toxic, it can have to do everything with safeguarding the people that are working there. You have to create policies for prevention of problems, formulate strategies in case it does occur, and then have, like I said, identify who will be affected, and in the end have effective communication channels. Again, key is test everything. This circle continues to go round, and every time when you have solved one problem, you might put your attention to something that you did not completely solve yet. Next slide, please. There are a couple of teams that you need in a company in order to properly take care of a problem. First of all is, of course, the core committee, the crisis management team. The crisis management team have to consider aspects like business continuity, budget, high-level communication with governments, with stakeholders, with the working council, the content of messages to investors, to the media, to customers. You have to realize that different customers need the same message, but maybe in a different kind of language. Not language concerning English, French, or German, but language in the way how they understand a problem. Insurance positions are important, etc., etc. Of course, it's also important that the top shows concern and that the CEO goes to the affected site when there's a big problem and shows his face and shows concern. It doesn't mean that he should be in the crisis team, because sometimes the CEO is not the best person to be in the crisis management team. Each member of the group needs to be assigned a specific and individual responsibility, and they must have a backup. Crises normally occur on Friday afternoon about 6 o'clock when everybody is going home, or in a weekend when the entire top is on a working visit in a faraway country, having some kind of meeting, and nobody can be reached. That is a great time to start a crisis, a real crisis. If there is a problem, the team should be grouped together in what we could call a war room, and that should have the right infrastructure for all communication and many more items which I will tell you about in one of the next slides. Next slide, please. There's a crisis control team, and that is responsible for the immediate hands-on operational response. It's located at the site of the problem, and there should be one member of this local team that is continually interacting with the core team. So that to ensure that there's a good update worldwide, there can be strategic decisions being made and advice being made, and very rapid budget approvals. In the also they need a kind of a crisis room or a war room, and also backup off-site facilities should be identified. Like I said, a war room needs to be equipped with all the relevant information. So it should have plans, it should have access to the personnel database, should have access to the safety database, etc., etc. And it should be tested that they have reliable infrastructure hardware. There should be fax machines, although that is not so much used anymore these days. And you should be sure that you have different telephone input and telephone output lines. Again, both teams need a very well procedure and it should be tested. Next slide. The crisis prevention team is a team that in advance tries to look where problems could occur and have appropriate policies for hazards and risks of the business. They should look at worst case scenarios and be ready to anticipate. And criteria are, was this situation really affect our bottom line? How realistic is it that will occur? Etc., etc., like this is shown on these slides. You can even think of that when, for instance, there was once involved in a proposal for a crisis when a factory was making toxic stuff, and they talked about fire in the factory, and there were two possibilities if there was fire. Either the toxins would go into the air when the fire was there, or when they tried to put it out with the fire brigade, it would be via the water, it would go into the earth, and that would be as toxic as well. What they did in the end, they made a kind of swimming pool or a big bassin under the factory, so in case that the fire brigade should come and use a lot of water, the water would be collected and would not go into the environment. Next slide. Each team should have a different, each team member should have a different kind of personality, and in principle the people should be complementary to each other. Each of them should of course have a broad vision, ability to stay cool. They should have a good knowledge of the company and its business and be able to make very quick and clearly expressed decisions. In the end, there's one person that makes the all-over decisions, but that is how it goes. What you need in such a team is an ID person, a communicator, somebody who is the advocate of the devil, somebody who looks, kind of bookkeeper, looking at if the procedures are all followed correctly, and let's say a humanist or an ethical person would be very helpful as well. Next slide. Well, it's important to put your plan in writing. Many companies, luckily these days, have a kind of crisis management plan in writing, but nobody knows where it can be found. Or it is not tested, and they will say, oh, if we call that person, he will know. The so-called Joe will know syndrome. Well, Joe will be out of office, on holiday, dead, or fired before. So an absence of a written plan causes hours and maybe even days of additional work for an already overloaded team. And then the people will fail to take basic actions. You need a good plan, you need checklists, whether everything is being followed, everybody is there, do you want to be there. And the plan should not be too long, it should be flexible, but it should also not to be too flexible, so it is a kind of absolute well-tuned instrument. Next slide. Again, test. The best way through crisis exercise simulations to test the effectiveness of procedures is to give training. Get the people together and at a certain moment, of course, talk about the crisis management plan, give a good training to everybody where it can be found, what is expected of the different people who they should contact, etc., etc. And in the end, it is important to have a crisis simulation, which can last for a couple of hours, half a day minimum for a simulation. We also give crisis simulations that last 2 days or even 3 days. In the end, it is very nice to have a press conference followed and to see how the people end up in talking to the press. Of course, if you talk to the press, you should be trained and not make all kinds of common mistakes that are too often happening these days. Next slide. Simulations should be run regularly. It's not so that you can say, okay, we have a crisis management plan, we tested it 2 years ago, and it will still be okay. Crisis management plan and a simulation is at least once a year, I would say. And sometimes in companies that are more vulnerable, you can do it even twice a year. It's also necessary to have a regular evaluation by outside experts, because if you're inside, you think that everything that you have done is correct, and an outside person can give an objective view what is going on to your company. Next slide. And then communication. What is important in communication is, first of all, speed. You should tell it all, you should tell it fast, and you should tell it truthfully. It doesn't mean that you can tell also quickly that you have a solution available. Sometimes solutions take a bit of time, and it is allowed to tell that we're working on it and we will come back to you at a certain moment with a solution proposal. And if you give a deadline for that, of course it cannot be weeks, especially not when it's important, it should be quicker. But if you say we will come back to you by tomorrow, you should come back by tomorrow and not by 2 days, because then people outside of the company will make up their own minds. So tell it all, tell it fast, and tell it truthfully. The messages must always be focused on people first, then on environment and property, and lastly about money. In principle, during crisis, you don't talk money. You talk people, you talk safety, and you are concerned. Next slide. The first 24 hours are critical, and you should have enough information that would not allow for speculation. A crisis does not wait. What you also have to have ready is to have a press pack from the headquarters, from the company, which can include photographs, diagrams, number of employees, how long you're there, what you make, who are the key executives, etc. And also a safety record and practices. And because many times people, when something happens, they will say, oh, a couple of years ago we heard that you also had a similar kind of problem, and you should know whether that is true, not true, and exactly what happened. It's also important to have that available in local language and according to local customs. What happens in Japan is not the same as what happens in other kinds of the world. I was once in a crisis, and the biggest problem was inside the company, when the Japanese had completely cultural different ideas than the people in Western Europe. Next slide. Telephone calls will happen. In some catastrophes, you have to handle loads of telephone calls in a very short period. And people will ask, also relatives of your own personnel will ask, are my people safe? Are they all right? What can I do? Can you help me, and how, etc. You should respond to media calls. You should have a crisis communication center ready with all the background information and prepare fast facts files about the company, etc. Make sure that the information from the crisis management team flows to the media response team, because the crisis management team might not be the best people or contain the best people to talk to the media. Also, do not forget to inform employees first. Next slide. It's very important to keep your employees informed, because they should know first, and it is terrible if an employee, let's say a medical representative visits a doctor and they say, oh, you have a big problem, don't you know? And the person doesn't know. That is not the first time that would happen, and that can lead to big embarrassment. So employees should have access to company statements before it's released. even if it's minutes, but it should be. Briefings should be set up to provide an opportunity to ask questions, and you should have to create a kind of ownership of the problem. You should be honest and open about decisions and share your solution plan, keep them updated. And also have a policy in place that explains that it's not the role of the employees to talk to the media about problems, but you should not fool employees neither. Next slide. These days we have also web information, so people will quickly turn to the company website and make sure that your relevant information on the web is up to date, and that there is a quick and easy access to a so-called emergency page where the people what is brought to the public can be easily find that information that is brought to the public themselves. Like, for instance, this webinar is now broadcasted, but it will also be later be available as a download, or you can go back to it, and in the same way you can put messages on the web, a news site. Next slide. You have to think of that there are two kinds of companies, those that had a crisis and those that will have a crisis, so you should always be prepared. And the unfortunate thing is that companies that did have a crisis do not always learn enough that they can prevent big problems afterwards. It is possible to turn a crisis into an opportunity, and it's also possible to, with the right attitude, to turn even a bad crisis into the view that the company takes their responsibility, and that's what you want to have in the end. With this, I give back to Sachin, and before we go later to the Q&A section. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jan Willem. That was a very interesting indeed. Well, as I mentioned in the beginning, as of last week, Synowledge has been acquired by Clinica. Clinica is a leading provider of specialty outsourced clinical services. With this acquisition, Clinica has added the Synowledge range of services in pharmacovigilance and regulatory affairs. At the same time, they have enhanced their own existing IT service offerings. So, Clinica's range of services include imaging core lab, cardiovascular safety, Clinical lab, e-clinical solutions, site network, patient recruitment, and post-approval services. So, Synowledge range of services on your screen. In drug safety, we offer pretty much end-to-end, beginning with medical information call center, case processing, submission, international literature monitoring, aggregate reports, signal detection, and QPPV services. In regulatory and clinical data management, we offer global submissions, regulatory and medical technical writing, end-to-end ECTD services, strategic labeling, risk management plans, and risk evaluation and mitigating strategies. To support clinical trials, we offer clinical data management services, right from your clinical database programming to medical coding up till database lock. Our IT services include the IT services is an independent unit. At the same time, they act complementary to our drug safety and regulatory, where we support all the drug safety systems as well as the regulatory systems in terms of validation, implementation, upgradations, any kind of data migration. Apart from this, we also support developing of custom application based on the client needs. Well, with this, we have reached the end of our presentation. There is so much more to discuss. However, in the best interest of time, we would like to proceed to the Q&A session. We've had some questions coming in during the webinar, and as we speak, I can see some more coming in. I will put across the questions to Dr. Jan Willem, and he will answer. Just in case we run out of time and we get questions after the session, we will respond to them, all of them individually. At the same time, everybody will be getting a copy of this recording as well as the presentation. Moving ahead, I have my first question ready from Nikita. Dr. Jan Willem, is there a difference between crisis management and issue management?
Thank you very much for that question. There is a small difference. Many people use crisis management and issue management as synonyms, also because they think that the word crisis is too loaded. But issue management actually is to handle problems before they become a crisis. And issue management is a cultural aspect of a company where they realize that crises can happen and they already want to tackle that, and therefore they have so-called issue management policies and procedures, and they actually they try to pre-plan and to look what could be problems in the end, what can be the bottom line of problems, and how they can prevent that. And that is actually the right definition of issue management.
Thank you. Our next question is from Charles. What is the most complex situation in a crisis team?
That's a nice question. The most complex situation is when you have people do not agree with each other in the crisis management team, and they want to get their right. At a certain moment, somebody has to make a decision on what is going to happen, especially when something is very important and has to be done fast. And it can be that another person in the same team does not agree at all. And that can lead to fights, and the people are already nervous and under pressure. And when you have a fight in the team, the problems are big. I can give you an example. What I said before, cultural differences, for example. In Japan, animal tests are not seen as heavy as in the Western world, and they just say nothing, and then people will go away anyway. And in the Western world, that doesn't work like that. And then you have an intercompany problem, which is during a crisis getting so complex that you cannot work effectively anymore.
Thank you. So our next question comes in from Dr. Claire. She says, who should normally be the spokesperson?
Normally the spokesperson of a company to media should be somebody who is well trained. The media should not be seen as an enemy, although most of the media are more interested in bad news than in good news. The person addressing the media should know that, but should also be aware that if he says something wrong, or for instance attacks the media, the news that will finally reach the public will be worse. And so it should be a very well-trained person, somebody that stays calm, somebody can listen. And definitely what journalists like very much is to build in silences, and then company people feel uncomfortable, start to talk, and that person should learn that he just should remain silent as well. It's not so that the CEO or the highest manager of the company is the best spokesperson. Many times that is actually not the case.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jan Willem. Well, I'm very conscious of the time, so I will have to end this session at this point. Thank you very much, everybody, for registering for this event and your patience all through this webinar. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to set up a one-on-one call, be it regarding the topic or any of our services. We'll be glad to set up a one-on-one meeting and answer any questions that you may have. Over the coming days, we will be distributing a copy of this recording. Thank you very much again, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.